She didn't say a word when the hotel manager told her to use the service entrance. She just looked at him, not with anger, not with humiliation, with something that took him a moment to recognize, and by the time he did, it was already too late. Her name was Darlene Okafor, 53 years old. She had driven 4 hours from Atlanta that morning in a rented Cadillac Escalade, wearing a charcoal blazer she'd bought at Nordstrom 6 years ago, and still hadn't found a reason good enough to retire. The bag on her shoulder was a worn leather tote, not a designer bag, not a statement piece, just a bag that had been with her long enough to know all her secrets. Inside it were 3 folders, a legal pad covered in her handwriting, and a certified cashier's check for $14 million. She was there to buy the Belhaven Resort and Conference Center outright. Nobody at the front desk knew that yet, and that, as it turned out, was the problem. Now, before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome to Heritage Tales. We tell stories about real people, real moments, and the kind of truth that doesn't always make the evening news. Hit that subscribe button and stay with us, because this one goes somewhere you're not going to see coming. The Belhaven had been struggling for 3 years. Anyone in the Georgia hospitality industry knew it. The original owner, a man named Clifford Mast, had poured his family's money into renovating the property back in 2019, convinced that a boutique luxury resort 90 minutes outside Atlanta was exactly what the market needed. He wasn't wrong about the market. He was wrong about nearly everything else: the contractor he hired, the management company he trusted, the loan structure his accountant put together. By the spring of that year, Belhaven owed more than it was earning by a margin that kept his CFO awake at night. Clifford had been quietly shopping the property for 8 months when Darlene's name came across his desk. He'd never heard of her. His assistant ran a background check, a credit check, called 2 references, and came back with a 4-page summary that Clifford read twice and still didn't fully believe. Darlene Okafor had started her first business at 26 out of a 2-bedroom apartment in Decatur, Georgia. A hospitality consulting firm. Small, then not small, then significant. She'd turned around failing hotel operations in 4 cities. She'd taken equity stakes in 3 of them. She'd sold 2 of those stakes at a combined profit that would have made Clifford's banker sit up straight. She currently held a controlling interest in a mid-scale hotel group with 9 properties across the Southeast. She had the capital, the track record, and the interest. Clifford called her himself. They spoke for 40 minutes. He liked her immediately. She was direct, she didn't oversell herself, and she asked the right questions about the property's liabilities before she ever asked about the upside. They agreed to meet in person. Clifford would bring his general manager, his CFO, and his lead attorney. Darlene said she'd come alone. Clifford thought that was interesting. He would later understand exactly what it meant. The morning of the meeting, Darlene arrived at Belhaven at 9:47 a.m., 13 minutes early. She pulled into the main entrance, handed her keys to the valet, and walked through the front doors with the leather tote on her shoulder and the kind of unhurried composure that comes from having walked into a lot of rooms where nobody was expecting her. The lobby was beautiful in the way that struggling luxury properties often are. All the surface elements of elegance, the Italian marble floors, the chandelier, the fresh orchids on the welcome desk, and underneath it, if you knew what to look for, the quiet signs of a place under pressure. Darlene noticed the orchids were real, but the water in the vase was cloudy. She noticed the chandelier had 3 bulbs out. She noticed the carpet runner near the elevator was lifted slightly at one corner, secured with a piece of clear tape someone had pressed down and hoped nobody would see. She saw all of it and said nothing. She approached the front desk and gave her name. The young woman behind the counter, her name tag said Priya, looked down at the computer, back up at Darlene, and said she didn't see a reservation. "I'm not a guest," Darlene said. "I have a 9 o'clock meeting with Mr. Mast." Priya nodded and picked up the phone. That was when the manager appeared. His name was Fletcher Graves, 41 years old. He had worked at Belhaven for 6 years and managed it for 2. And in those 2 years, he had developed a very specific way of moving through the lobby. A proprietary kind of authority. Shoulders back. Hands Clasped behind him walked the walk of a man who considered himself the final word on everything that happened between those marble floors and that chandelier. He appeared from somewhere behind the desk, glanced at Darlene once, and made a decision in the space of about 3 seconds. "Can I help you?" he said, not warmly. Darlene looked at him. "I'm here to see Clifford Mast. I have a 9 o'clock. Fletcher Graves looked at the leather tote. He looked at her blazer. He looked at the worn edges of her shoes. And something in his face did the thing that faces do when they've already made up their mind. It settled. Closed. Decided. "Deliveries come around the back," he said. "Through the service corridor. There are signs." The lobby was not loud. There were 3 guests at the far end near the concierge desk, a couple waiting for the elevator, and Priya behind the counter, who went very still. Darlene did not move. She looked at Fletcher Graves with an expression that was not anger, and not embarrassment, and not the hot flush of someone caught off guard. It was something quieter and far more deliberate. The expression of a woman who had seen this before, who had cataloged it, filed it, and was now adding one more entry. "I'm not making a delivery," she said. Her voice was even. "My name is Darlene Okafor. I have a 9 o'clock meeting with the property owner. You may want to confirm that before you say anything else." Fletcher Graves did not confirm it. "Our back entrance is perfectly adequate for Fletcher." The voice came from across the lobby. Clifford Mast was walking toward them from the direction of the conference corridor, his hand already extended, his face doing the specific gymnastics of a man who is just understood exactly what he is walking into. Behind him were his CFO, a thin man named Gordon Teal, and his attorney, Renata Brigraves, with an expression like she was taking notes. Clifford shook Darlene's hand with both of notes. Clifford shook Darlene's hand with both of his. "Okafor, I'm so glad you made it. I hope the drive wasn't too bad." "Not at all," Darlene said. "Beautiful morning." Clifford turned to Fletcher. There was a pause, the kind of pause that arrives like weather, sudden and total. "This is Ms. Darlene Okafor," he said carefully. "She's our guest today." Fletcher Graves said nothing. His jaw moved slightly, the way jaws do when the mind behind them is working very fast and not finding anything useful. He nodded once, stiffly, and walked back toward the desk. Renata Bryson, the attorney, watched him go. Darlene picked up her tote and followed Clifford down the corridor toward the conference room, and she did not look back. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Darlene had done her homework in a way that made Gordon Teal, the CFO, visibly uncomfortable within the first 20 minutes. She had reviewed Belhaven's public filings, cross-referenced them against regional comp data, and developed her own projection model that turned out to be more accurate than the one Gordon had prepared for the meeting. She found 2 line items in the operating budget that nobody had flagged. She asked about a vendor contract that everyone else had overlooked. By the 90-minute mark, Clifford Mast had stopped trying to sell the property and started just answering her questions. By the 2-hour mark, Gordon Teal had his sleeves rolled up and was writing things down on her legal pad because she'd brought the only one in the room with enough blank space. Renata Bryson said almost nothing. She watched Darlene work and occasionally made small notes of her own. At 2 hours and 40 minutes, Darlene closed the folder in front of her. "I'd like to make an offer," she said. "Subject to a 2-week due diligence period, I'm prepared to purchase Belhaven at $14.2 million, all cash, with assumption of the outstanding vendor liabilities. I'll need access to the full staffing records and the maintenance logs from the last 18 months. Clifford looked at Gordon. Gordon looked at Renata. Renata was already reaching for her briefcase. They took a short break. Darlene walked alone down the conference corridor toward the lobby, found a chair near the window, and sat with her tote on her lap, looking out at the garden the resort had planted along the east side of the building. It was well tended. She noted that. Some things here were being cared for. She was still sitting there when Fletcher Graves walked past. He saw her. She saw him see her. He kept walking. The due diligence period began the following Monday. Darlene sent a team, 2 analysts, a property inspector, and a hospitality operations consultant she had worked with for 11 years named Bertrand Cole. Bertrand was thorough in a way that made building managers nervous, and he arrived at Belhaven on a Tuesday morning with a clipboard and a methodical approach that suggested he intended to look at every single thing. Fletcher Graves was assigned as the point of contact for the due diligence team. It was, in retrospect, not a good assignment. By Thursday, Bertrand had flagged 3 issues with the service contracts, identified a maintenance backlog that the logs had underrepresented, and discovered that terms that were unfavorable to Belhaven in ways that had apparently never been renegotiated. He reported all of this to Darlene in his usual way, factually, methodically, without drama. Darlene read his report on a Friday evening, made 2 calls, and adjusted her offer by $600,000. She sent the revised figure to Renata Bryson on Saturday morning. Renata called Clifford. Clifford called Gordon. They discussed it for about 40 minutes and then accepted, because the revised number still represented their best offer by a distance, and everyone in that conversation understood it. The purchase closed on a Thursday morning in the offices of Renata Bryson's firm in downtown Atlanta. Darlene signed 11 documents. Clifford signed 11 documents. Gordon Teal, who had spent 30 years in hospitality finance, watched a woman who had showed up to a luxury resort with a worn leather tote and been directed to the service entrance sign her name to a $14 million cash acquisition. And he thought he should probably think about that for a while. If you're still with us, drop a comment below. Tell us what you would have done in Darlene's position. When that manager pointed her to the service entrance, we read every single one. The staff at Belhaven learned about the ownership change on a Friday afternoon when Clifford Mast gathered everyone in the main conference room as the property's new owner. He kept his remarks brief. He thanked the staff. He said he was confident the property was in good hands. Darlene stood at the front of the room and looked at the faces in front of her. The kitchen staff, the housekeeping team, the front desk clerks, the concierge, the valet attendants, the maintenance crew. Priya from the front desk was in the 3rd row, sitting very straight. Darlene made eye contact with her and nodded slightly. She spoke for 12 minutes. She talked about the property's strengths. She talked about the changes she intended to make and the timeline for making them. She told the staff that she had reviewed the staffing records and that her intention was to build from the team already in place, not replace it. Fletcher Graves was seated in the back row. He sat through all 12 minutes with the particular stillness of a man who is aware that something significant is happening and is not yet certain how significant. He found out 2 days later. Darlene met with him on a Monday morning in the small office behind the main desk that the general manager used. She sat across from him with her tote on the chair beside her and a single folder on the table between them. She told him she had reviewed his management record. She told him what she had found: the high staff turnover rate in the 2 years of his tenure, the pattern in exit interviews, the vendor disputes that had been mishandled, the maintenance log discrepancies. She laid it out without anger and without performance, the way you might describe the weather to someone who is about to drive somewhere and needs accurate information. Then she told him that she had also reviewed what had happened in the lobby on the morning of her first visit. Fletcher Graves started to say something about a misunderstanding. "Mr. Graves," Darlene said. And she said it in a tone that was not unkind, but was also entirely finished with detours. "I have worked in hospitality for 27 years. I have walked into a lot of rooms. I know the difference between a misunderstanding and a decision." He didn't say anything after that. She told him his position was being eliminated as part of a management restructure. She told him his severance terms, which were fair. She'd made sure of that. She slid the folder across the table. She thanked him for his time. He picked up the folder and left. Darlene sat alone in the small office for a moment. Outside the window, she could see the East Garden, the same one she'd looked at from the corridor during the break in their first meeting, the one that was well tended even when everything else was under pressure. She thought about that. About what it meant, that even in a struggling place, there are people who keep doing the work right, who water the plants, even when the water in the lobby vase is cloudy, who press down the carpet tape and hope someone notices and gets around to fixing it properly. Those were the people she was here for. In the 8 months following Darlene's acquisition, Belhaven's operational costs dropped by 19%. Occupancy rates, which had been running at 54% through the previous year, climbed to 68% by the end of the third quarter. The vendor contracts Bertrand had flagged were renegotiated. The maintenance backlog was cleared. The chandelier in the lobby had all its bulbs replaced on the second day of Darlene's ownership, because she had noticed them on her first visit and written it in the margin of her legal pad. Priya was promoted to front desk supervisor. The valet team, which had operated under a third-party contractor at below-market wages, was brought in-house and given a compensation structure that resulted in a 60% reduction in turnover within 6 months. A journalist from a regional business publication came to write a profile on the acquisition. She asked Darlene whether the moment in the lobby, the service entrance comment, had affected her decision to purchase the property. Darlene thought about this for a moment. "No," she said. "I had already decided. I knew what this property was worth before I walked through that door." She paused. "What it affected was my understanding of what needed to change." The journalist asked what she meant. "A building is easy to fix," Darlene said. "You find what's broken, you repair it, you bring in people who know what they're doing. What's harder is the thing that happens when the person at the front desk directs a guest to the service entrance and nobody in the lobby says a word. That's a culture, and culture comes from the top." She looked out the window at the garden. This one needed a new top. The article ran on a Thursday. By Saturday, it had been shared widely enough that Clifford Mast's phone rang twice. Old colleagues calling to say they'd read it. He read it himself, alone at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and he felt something that was not quite guilt and not quite pride, but was somewhere in the complicated territory between the two. He had done the right thing, he thought. He had called her himself. He had walked across the lobby. He had introduced her by name. He wondered if it was enough. He suspected, in the honest part of himself, that it probably wasn't. But it was what he had done, and he was grateful, at least, that when the moment came, he had crossed the room. Fletcher Graves was not unemployed for long. He moved into a management role at a property 2 counties over. A smaller operation, less complex, different kind of pressure. Whether he carried anything with him from what happened at Belhaven, whether he thought about the woman with the leather tote and the legal pad and the cashier's check, nobody can say for certain. What is certain is this. On the morning Darlene Okafor walked into the Belhaven lobby, she was carrying $14 million in a worn bag and wearing a blazer she'd bought 6 years ago. And the man who assessed her worth in 3 seconds and pointed her to the service entrance got every single thing wrong. Not because of the money. The money was almost beside the point. Because the woman in front of him had spent 27 years building something real, earning every credential through work that nobody handed her, walking into rooms where nobody expected her, and leaving those rooms changed. Because she had looked at a struggling property and seen not what it was, but what it could be. Because when the moment came, not the moment of the sale, but the moment of the lobby, she had done the thing that is in some ways the hardest thing. She had not flinched. She had not shrunk. She had stood exactly where she was and looked at him and said her name clearly and waited. That composure wasn't performance. It was practice. 27 years of it. And if you want to know the lesson Darlene Okafor took from that morning, she said it plainly in an interview the following year when someone asked her what advice she would give to young black women entering the business world. She said, "Don't go where they make you feel like you came in the wrong door. And if you're already there, buy the building." If this story meant something to you, like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. There are more stories like this one coming, about the people who get underestimated, who do the work anyway, and who end up owning the room. Subscribe to Heritage Tales so you don't miss a single one. And drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to know, what does it take to walk into a room where nobody sees you and stay?